Hey, everybody, greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Timeless Gamer Show, where our games and our bodies may grow out of date, but our gaming experiences will forever remain. Hey, Timeless! And the show is now streaming live in Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And for all of our archive videos, you can still check them out by going to the YouTube channel of the Timeless Gamers Show. You can also check out our website, timelessgamers.com. Or you can also listen to us talk. That is okay. Just going to the major streaming platforms out there, searching Timeless Gamers Show. And we would like to take this opportunity to show our appreciation to BitMap Books and Streamyard for allowing us to be one of their official affiliates. And a shout out to our Retromancy cohorts, Studio.ph and Shuffle Emporium. And of course, to our retro gaming friends from the Sega Mega Masters podcast and the Retro Gamers and Collectors of the Philippines. So, previously on the Timeless Gamer Show, we did a dissertation of Sir Virage's different video game controllers, all the way from the Amiga, Atari, up to the PlayStation era. So, if you're the type of person who are aficionados or enthusiasts of different video game controllers, you can just check that out in our YouTube channel. It's a very visual show, to be honest. So can't really help you guys who are listening to the audio version of the show. So we rather suggest go check out the actual video edition of that particular episode. So for tonight, it's going to be another interview episode. So joining us for this evening, we got Sir Joel.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are. This is Joel here on the Timeless Gamer Show, member of the panel, and just enjoying myself with every single episode. We are live. We are going to be talking about history, and we try to entertain everybody at the same time. Back to you, John.
All right, thank you for that, Sir Joel. So it's just me and Sir Joel for tonight, guys. The other folks are quite busy with their day jobs, but that's okay. The show must go on. But for the sake of this for this episode, it's going to be a more tightly written up show. So let's just get into it already. For our special guest for tonight, he was a former game tester, game designer, who worked under Sega of America, Rockstar Games, 3DO, BlueSky Software, among other things. He was involved in the producing of the video games such as The Midnight Club, especially Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition, Eternal Champions CD, Tempo 32X, Saturn Bomberman, Johnny Mosley Mad Tricks, Guardian Heroes, Shining Force 3, and lots more. Hailing from San Diego, California, we got Jeff Junio joining us.
Morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone wherever you're viewing this. And thank you, Joe and Joel, for having me. So, Joe, as you were going through that lineup, it just brought up so many memories. So I'm just like, geez, I've been in this game for a long time.
Well, I mean, it's when you do something that you love, you tend to stick with it, right?
Yep.
So, Joe, will you do the honors of the first question?
All right. So, before we do that, like a quick backstory on how this happened. So we had Sir Eric Wahlberg a while back, and he recommended Sir Jeff to be our next to be our next guest here in the Timeless Gamer Show. And he said, "Oh, you guys will love Jeff because he's also a Filipino." And I'm like, "Oh shit, really?" So that would be perfect then, because because some of our viewers are Filipinos. And then true story, Sir Joel. So when I was when I was exchanging messages with Sir Jeff. So every now and then I keep saying po, good morning, sir. Good morning, sir. You know how we we tend to be polite in Filipino and Tagalog, right? And
Yes.
he kept on replying to me in English.
In
And,
English,
and
yes.
at first I'm like, um, and ma- and I didn't really thought that he didn't speak any
Mm.
like any Tagalog words at all. Maybe he's just being typical San Diego Californian guy. Maybe he thinks I'm English too.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then lo and behold, we learned. So you know what, Sir Jeff? Let's just
Yeah.
hear it from you. What's your
Jeff,
background?
tell us a little bit about your background,
The misconception.
culturally, historically. Yeah.
Please
Mhm.
clear it out.
Yes.
Right.
Clear out the confusion.
So it was funny, yeah. So Joe, when you reached out to me, and I obviously Filipino. I have a lot of family members Filipino, so we'll communicate like on Facebook or on Slack or through text on mobile devices. And oh, hey Eric, what's up? And so I'm used to that. And yeah, you're correct. When I responded, obviously didn't respond back, in Tagalog and in pure English. And it's just one of those things where I was born in the Philippines. I was 1 year old when my mom and I immigrated here to the States. And it was just a conscious decision that my mom made when we moved here that she was just going to teach me English. I think, different times, this was back in the 70s. So obviously, she wanted me to really kind of just lean into the culture, learn English, and just focus in on English, and language barriers and whatnot. So that was the original, reasoning. And it was just one of those things where, just for me, I mean, well, I'm in San Francisco at the time, and I'm around all these English-speaking people. So when in Rome, do what the Romans do. So it essentially just continued on in learning,
Sir Eric's
English.
buying something.
Well,
barely. Thank you, Eric. So real quick, kind of like warning. Eric is probably going to chime in quite a bit with some of these
and
like
that's perfectly
one-liners
fine.
and inside jokes. So yeah,
Yeah,
so,
that's perfectly fine. The thing about it is we absolutely love interaction with our audience. We love people
yes,
who chime in the chats, and even the people who talk to us after the episode. Just throw in your comments into the Facebook chats or in the YouTube chats later on. Whatever, we will do our very best to respond to all of them as we see them whenever they come in. So yeah,
yep.
I completely relate with how Jeff was raised, because of the fact that I'm raising my daughter too, and it is kind of a struggle to either teach her straight English, and the missus is doing her very best to teach Tagalog to her. Sometimes it can get a little bit of a jumble, but ultimately you want to fit into the culture, into the zeitgeist. You want to make sure that you can function properly in the society, and I imagine that's what your parents thought at the same time during the time.
Absolutely. But
Mhm.
I've obviously being around all my family all my life, I've gotten used to it, and I can navigate. Like I don't understand, and I don't speak it, but I can navigate, and generally I can understand when they're talking about me, or whatever the case
Well,
may
yeah,
be, or if
of
I'm in
course.
trouble or I did something wrong. So yeah, so I
At
at
least you,
least
at
functionally
least you
can
need
work through
that.
it.
At least, right? I mean, if people are
Right.
talking about you, you need to know that much.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that was the first question. So I guess let's just get into it. Who into the industry portion of it? As somebody who grew up, who was trying to fit into the culture, growing up, and going into the industry, into the gaming industry. Were your parents in the gaming industry or in the electronics industry, at least going into the US? No.
Nope, not at all. My father worked for the post office, and my mom worked over at. For those of you that know, in the Bay Area, worked at PG&E, the local utility company, the electric company, and so she was a key punch operator over there, and so very much blue collar, kind of, that background, and so. I grew up just a regular old, California boy, into sports, basketball, got into video games, obviously, very, very early, with the Atari 2600, being my first foray into that. And so it was just one of those things where, it wasn't necessarily something that was pushed. And obviously I got into it more as a hobby to start, right? Got the first 2600, played all of those classic games, and then graduated into the Commodore 64 after that. Had a friend down the road that, had the Intellivision, really steeped in the early video game culture stuff, right? So, but again, it was just more or less viewed as a hobby at the time. So never in my wildest dreams did I even, think that I would, stumble into the industry, much less make a career out of it, these several years later.
Well, it's, the conversation flows. So how did you get into the industry then?
So, interesting thing. I was working prior to getting into the industry as a shipping and receivings clerk at a electronics manufacturer over in Milpitas in the Bay Area, and really hated it. It was one of those things where it was just like a lot of physical labor, a hot warehouse, and I was really just not happy there. But I was also doing, at the time, I was holding down several jobs. My original designs were that I wanted to go into the entertainment industry, but more or less on like the film and movie side of things. So I actually had gone to school in Seattle to study music video business. And so there I had studied, and I was actually going to go in and I wanted to be a sound engineer, for music. But I realized I didn't have an ear for it, even though I DJ'd and stuff. But that's, totally different things, right? Totally different skill sets.
Was that a requirement?
What was that?
Having the ear for it?
Well, I mean, in terms of having an ear for it, and then kind of understanding like how things kind of fit and work, and then I just kind of realized that it just wasn't really necessarily something that, because I DJ'd before that, but it's a different thing. And so I think just like the production of music, right, it was just something that I didn't quite understand, and it wasn't quite jiving with me. But then what I realized then is that I then pivoted and I went into, basically videography, video production. So that's really where I kind of fell into. So I started, really doing a lot of camera work, and then also just doing editing, which was really my main focus. So when I graduated, what I should have done, and that's in Seattle, I should have just moved to Los Angeles, but instead I ended up going back to San Francisco. And so tried, doing that, worked a lot of, jobs, odd jobs here. I used to, film video weddings, so I would go in and be the videographer that's on site and doing the weddings and stuff like that. So prior to Sega, I had 3 different jobs. So I was at the shipping warehouse, clerk job in Milpitas. I was doing videography. And then I was also doing basically kind of like freelance, type work, for a local studio. And that went on for a long time. It just wasn't going anywhere. So then fast forward to, I believe it was like early 93. I ended up going to a party with a friend of mine. I think it was his birthday. And I met a guy there, name's Roger, really cool guy. And, as custom, you meet somebody who knows like, hey, what do you do? Right. Joel, what do you do? And so, he told me, oh, I work at Sega. And I'm like, the video game company?
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah. And I go, what do you do there? And he goes, oh, I'm doing testing and stuff like that. And I go, wait, so you get paid to play the games? And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, dude, how did you get in? Right. And he told me, so at the time they had a temp agency that they was brought on to basically vet and hire the staff for the testing group. And so he gave me the number and I called him up, went in, you had to do obviously the interview and a written test. And
a written test?
Did that. A written test, yeah.
For what?
I'm sure
like
we'll get into it later. So basically, some of the questions that they asked were like, okay, hey, what's like your favorite video game and why, right? And then I forgot what the other questions are, but essentially what it was designed to do is to one, kind of get a sense of like what your writing skill and writing level is at, and then how well can you express and explain those things, right? Which are really important skills to have, especially as a tester at that time, right? So you have to write a lot of bugs, and you have to be able to do it in a way that you can explain in a way that's effective, right? And so yeah, did that, and the rest was history. They ended up hiring me, and then I got brought in at Sega as a tester, and that brought me here today.
Well, how did it feel during those early days of the 90s? I mean, this was the 90s. Lots of changes were happening in the industry. The console wars were in full swing. Everybody had their side. Once they found out that you were with Sega, they were likely going to beat you up. No. I mean, just no, because how kids were fiercely loyal to whatever platform they had. How did it feel like entering into that industry, seeing all these things coming up into the system, and knowing that they're going to be a couple of years down the line, having that knowledge, oh, this is going to be so cool. This is going to impact so many people and everything like that. Was it as exciting for you on the inside? I know a tester job can get a little bit hard and tedious and everything, but the fact that you can see all of these things happening and coming down the pipe, was it as exciting for you as a gamer per se?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it was one of those things where once I went in for the test and the interview, the initial one, and I got hired on, I couldn't believe it. It was like, whoa, this is crazy. I'm actually going to get paid to play games. And so that part of it was just exciting to start. And then obviously I was mentioned before with the multiple jobs, just looking really to kind of jumpstart, my career and my passion again. It essentially kind of killed, my passion in terms of like trying to get into, like the television, movies and stuff like that. And so when this opportunity came, it was just like, oh, this is cool. I need to, ride this as far as I can take it, and see where this goes. So the other part of your question then as well, Joe, is that, yeah, it was super exciting. Obviously, the two main players back then, right, were Nintendo and Sega. And admittedly, I'm a Nintendo head, going into this.
Oh, my goodness. Right? Okay. Eric, you remember that one.
Right. I mean, but you have to remember, right, at that point in time, I mentioned the Atari 2600. Clearly, we all knew what happened there, right? There was a crash, right? And so there was a dearth of, and just really nothing in terms of video games at that point in time for a good long while. And then a little system named NES came out, right? And so I got back into that, and that was my jam. So it was one of those things where I got really heavy back into games. And then it was really one of those things where Sega at that point in time, it's like, obviously they had the Master System. Well, I didn't know any Master System games, much less anybody that owned a Master System, right? So it was just really out of happenstance, right? that it's just like I fell into Nintendo. And so grew up with that. And then as we got into the 16-bit era, obviously with the Genesis, and then with the SNES, and I had a SNES. And of course, this is way back when, where it's just like my mom is not going to get me all of these systems, right? And so I grew up with the NES, and so guess what? I had the SNES, and so it was one of those things where just like I didn't really have the Genesis at that point in time, but again, luckily I had friends that
you are a Filipino. That is why.
Oh yeah,
I mean, one of the things being a Filipino, you own a Nintendo, not a Sega.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, way back when Filipinos, in general, we didn't have all that much money. So if we bought a system, we stuck with it. And, we tended to just go with whatever was there. What your friends had, what they talked about, you wanted to get that same system. And Filipinos, being Filipinos, we tended to go Nintendo. So, yeah. Continue. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jeff.
Absolutely. But yeah, so it was one of those things where it's just like, but I knew who Sega was, obviously. But the thing was, is that at that point in time, they didn't really have any real killer apps, right? What were they really known for at that point in time?
The Master System era.
Right, exactly. And so then
Garage will be upset.
Oh, Garage is gonna be pissed. We have now achieved one of our co-panelists here, Garage, who sadly couldn't make it today. One of our objectives in every single show is to piss off Viraj. And now that even if he's not here, I'm sure that we've achieved that objective now. Anyway, continue.
He's listening.
I'll gladly be the surrogate for that.
Oh yeah, there you go.
So yeah, so at that point in time, Sega no. Nintendo, yes.
Yeah, there you go.
But I digress. So, but obviously, when the opportunity came up at that point in time, Sega was really starting to come up, and what really stood out, obviously, at that point in time was their marketing, right? Started to seeing the commercials, with the Sega Scream, Sega does what Nintendo don't, right? So there were the new kids on the block, right? And so it was one of those things where it really synced up. There was a good synchronicity where I was at that point in time in my life, right? I'm in my early 20s, and it was one of those things where, okay, maybe the Nintendo is starting to be a little bit more kind of a kiddie-ish, type of thing for me. And so then obviously, Sega being a little bit more cooler, they were, really kind of pushing the envelope at that point in time on many facets. And so then it was just one of those things where it was just, I lucked into it. I fell into Sega at a great time as a company, and then also for myself personally. So when I got into Sega, it was great, seeing all of these like-minded people, of the same age, and we're all, really just babies at the time when you really think about it. I mean, if everyone out there, think about how you were in your early 20s. A lot of us were a lot of butt heads, a lot of kind of like, immature and things along those lines. So, but it was awesome being in that environment and seeing all of these people really driven and have that passion for games. And, Joel, as you mentioned, it's like testing in QA nowadays, right? It's really a thankless job. But I was lucky to come up in the Sega test era, where at that point in time, and I think Eric can attest to this, where the testing group was really viewed as very important, right? Especially by a lot of key folks in the organization. And so it was just great. It was one of those things where we took pride in the work that we did, put in a lot of hours, right? I mean, crunch time, I'm sure all of you have heard that term. The reason why that came about, right, is because of those that era. And I'm seeing here the video that we have. This is from a Sega test training video that we had put together at the time. And so I believe this is Chris that is doing the virtual guns, and this is, I think, Virtual Cop. But yeah, so I'm in it, Eric's in it, and a whole bunch of other folks from the Sega test group is in it. It was fun. It was a lot of fun to do that.
One question though that crops up. I imagine it's like finding your statement of finding those like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a special moment when you find people who think the same as you, who have the same background as you, who have the same culture as you, despite all the physical differences, but despite the geographical differences. When you get into a group that has that synchronicity, I can imagine the electricity in the air happening during that time. So of course, you also had the mission of fighting against the big red giant, Nintendo.
Yes.
That was, we read, Joe and I both read the Console Wars by Harris, right, Joe? And the question was, have you read that book, Console Wars by Harris?
I actually have not. I've seen the excerpts of it, and it's one of those things where I lived it. So
yeah, exactly. It was gonna ask.
One of those things where it's like I don't need to kind of add on to that.
I was gonna say, I was gonna ask like how reading the book was very exciting for Joe and I. We enjoyed it immensely. I even got the audiobook to listen to while I'm driving every now and then. I was just wondering how close the retellings of inside of that book were to your personal experiences. But we'll think about that kind of thing down the line once you've had the chance to listen to it or read it. But in general, how was the sense of competition inside the company during that time?
It was very much, even though Sega was on the up and up, right? And I believe when I joined in October of '93. I want to say that we Sega at the time had essentially taken the lead, right? But there was always kind of this sense of like it was us versus them. And, obviously it was one of those things where they were very much entrenched, right? They were the industry, they were the standard. And so it was one of those things where there was it put the fire in our belly, so to speak, right? Where it's just like, okay, we're going to go ahead and kick their asses. Hopefully I can swear a little bit. I'm going to try to,
absolutely. Yeah.
but yeah, we're going to kick their asses.
This is a family show. This is a family show, but adults are still part of the family. So anyway, continue.
I will endeavor to
allow it.
Keep it as PC.
We'll allow it. Yeah, we'll allow it.
We'll allow it.
You
Okay,
will
cool.
not believe some of the jokes that we toss around here every now and then. What can I say? Anyway, continue.
But yeah,
We'll flip it out on editing.
I got it. Awesome. But yeah, it was definitely a sense of like us versus them. And so, and the sheer amount of product and projects and games that are coming through the Sega test department at that point in time was just astounding. So you can see that, even without really getting a sense of like, the pure numbers and getting into the Wall Street side of things, how we were doing, you can tell from the inside that it's like, there's just a lot of things going on. I don't know if it was mentioned before, but in the Sega test department, I fell into the day crew. And so we had a day and a night crew. And fully staffed on both sides of it. I can't remember what the numbers were, but I want to say we had like maybe close to anywhere between 50 to 75 testers per shift. A lot of cubicles, a lot of equipment, and we got to a point where that wasn't enough. And so we ended up having to have a basically like a graveyard shift. So we had 3 shifts that were going. So just to give you a sense of just like how much product and how many things were going through the test department, it was just insane. So, but to get back to your original question, Joel, it was really, really taking a lot of pride in that. And obviously with us being testers, there's only so much that we can do to affect, the actual, game itself. We would have opportunities to leave our comments, leave our feedback. But generally speaking, anyone that's in game development understands and knows, right? Especially back then, that testing was the last line of defense, right? So a lot of the designs, is already set, and so, but we would do our best, to, at least do what our part is deliver a clean game, as much as we possibly can, so. That's how we were able to kind of affect everything.
Yeah, because of the fact that back then there was no such thing as patches, DLCs, things like that. Once you shipped out a cartridge or a disc or whatever, that was that. There's no such thing as fixing it after the fact. So you guys were the ones who made sure that if something was going to get through, it was so deeply hidden that that Indiana Jones needed to find it, something like that. So
exactly.
in that respect, I can understand how you guys were the last line of defense against a product being launched badly. I can imagine that. Yeah.
Right. Now, obviously, if there were, instances where, like, let's just say a fatal bug was discovered, right, post-release, and it's starting to lead to actual consumers, those that purchased the product, returning them, then I don't recall anything in Sega, but I have heard instances where at other companies, like, they had to recall everything, give refunds, and then they would have to basically like send it out. So.
Pac-Man.
Oh, yeah. But then in the 2600 era, have to admit, it was still, despite the fact that there was a glut of games during that time afterwards, it was foundational to our development. And Jeff and I imagine he had the same background as me. Started with the Atari 2600. You had an amazing artwork on the cartridge, and then once you got there, it was this little square moving around and everything. That's how things were back then. And Viraj is going to disdain us for that, but that was our gaming background. That's how we were. And this is something on a personal note. How the emphasis right now is to cultural differences and everything. Back then, I imagine, like we talked about, the fact that we are integrated into everybody else's lifestyle and everything. We tried to work as a cohesive unit back then, back in the 80s, 90s and everything. Was your being a Filipino a huge factor in in how you interacted with your peers inside the industry, or was it something that said, "Oh, okay, you're Pinoy. We'll just let's talk business and everything like that." How was it back then as a atmosphere, culture kind of thing?
So what's interesting, that's a great question,
Mhm.
especially when you juxtapose it against basically what the culture is like now.
Yeah.
I would actually say back then, for me, I never really got a sense of, hey, you're Filipino and it's different, right? Or
Mhm.
whatever the case may be. It
Yeah.
was really, like I said, with as many people that we had in Sega test team at that time, it was actually really amazing how well we all got along, right? And obviously, being young and everything like that, it now just comes down to personalities, right?
Mhm.
Is this guy a jerk? Is he kind of easygoing? Whatever the case may be, right? So it really kind of came down to those, and not necessarily anything, in terms of ethnicity.
Mhm.
But it was one of those things where, I mean, obviously, me being Filipino, being a brown man, I do pick up on some things. And one of the things that I obviously picked up on is like, hey, there's not a lot of, Filipinos around here, not a lot of
Not a
Asians.
lot of
And
diversity, you mean? Not a
Mhm.
lot of color. There you
yes,
go.
yes. And so it was one of those things, and it was one of the weird things that, and again, maybe this isn't necessarily a PC thing anymore, but back then, and I'm glad Eric is here, we would always make fun, where eventually we would, have a lot more, folks of
Mhm.
different backgrounds come in. And Eric, basically, I would hang out with him a lot, and we would make some jokes and everything. And with Eric, he'd say something to me, or I'd say
Mhm.
something to him, because why are you saying that? And I'm like, it's because you're white.
Yeah. That's exactly my dynamic with my other
Right.
coworkers too. I like to think that we bring Jeff and I kind of bring in the like, who cares? Who cares what
Right.
you are or where you come from? If you can take a joke, if you can roll with the punches, then you're all right by my book. And it sounds like Jeff and Eric and everything grew up with that
Yes.
kind of atmosphere too.
It,
It's
it's funny. It's funny. You should say that.
Mm,
You should say that, Sir Joel and Sir Jeff,
mm,
because
yeah.
in my workplace, because I'm here in Australia, and I work as a nurse here in Australia, and among all of the Filipino nurses who work in our ward,
Mhm.
I'm the only Filipino who sounds American.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's either they have this very deep, thick Australian accent, or you are one of those Filipinos who have the Filipino accent when talking in
Mm.
English, and
Yep.
It's
then I'm the only guy. I'm the only person who sounds like this.
it's
Right.
your
Right.
exposure to us, now that you're hanging around with me, you're hanging around with Jeff, you're hanging around with Eric, your American accent is going to be even more pronounced, Joe. So when you get to work, people are going to make fun of you. Get ready for it.
Oh no, I said, oh no, I'm from South America.
Or you can put on your
I just saw
Filipino
Eric
accent. Mm.
ping in here, and yeah, even though he's white, he knows more Tagalog than I do. So
Oh yeah, that's true.
He
He made
does.
so
he made out a Filipino line, a Tagalog line when he
he
came
did,
on.
yes,
He was amazing, very good,
yeah.
well
That's
done.
why Eric's my man, dude, so that's my dude.
No, that's the thing. I mean, the people say that it's important right now to have diversity and everything. I back in
Yes,
the 80s and 90s, the important thing for us was that we all got along, that we enjoyed each
yes.
other's
I love that
company.
dynamic that you two have in. So have the white guy translate Filipino to the actual
Exactly.
Filipino.
He can tell me what you guys are talking about in Tagalog. So yeah. So hey, cool.
you know that's the thing. So and one let's get into the games. Somebody here in the chats asked a very pointed question. What is your favorite, Marlon Hurtado Eliscupides asked, what is your favorite game design and why? I'm presuming that Marlon meant, what is your favorite game design in terms of what style of game design you like particularly? Is it
Either
the
either that
real?
or what's his favorite game that he
Yeah, we can
designed.
get it. Yeah, we can get into that one. But in general, when you, as a game designer, is there a particular game design style that you like? Like, do you like it fast paced? Do you like it slow and turn-based? Do you like it atmospheric? Do you like it very narrow? What is your favorite game designs as a designer, and why?
My initial reaction is going to be a crappy answer. Is it's all of the above, right? At the end of the day, as a designer, right? You look at like all facets. But my knee-jerk reaction upon hearing that first question was I'd have to say probably Bomberman. It's the Bomberman series,
Nice.
mainly because it's fast-paced, right? And for me, that's almost pure design, right? Because you're really talking about like how does the Bomberman interact with the field itself, right? So you're placing bombs. You need to make sure that you don't get exploded yourself, right? And then there's a building up of it, right? You can build up your powers, but then also at the same time you're playing against other players that are doing the same thing, have the same abilities, and then you can then start to acquire and level up, right? And then how do those elements work with each other, right? And how do you combat that? And so very frenetic pace, obviously, a lot of strategy, and then a lot of skill, obviously, that's involved with that. So that would be probably my first knee-jerk reaction in terms of like what I would basically kind of lean into, or what speaks to me, from a design mechanic standpoint.
Very arcadey then. Dan, one of our compatriots here in Timeless Gamer, is very much an arcade guy, and I kind of fancy myself as an arcade guy too. So your knee-jerk reaction is more towards the think at the nanoseconds moment, arcade style of gameplay and design and everything like that.
Right.
Pure distillation of everything that can be done as a gamer in that one point. So yeah, okay, that sounds interesting.
Right. If you think about it, it makes sense, right? Given my background, starting off at the Atari 2600, that's really what it was all about back then, right? And I was steeped in the arcade culture, right? When there was an arcade. For those who aren't too young to remember, you would go to the mall, and the arcade was the center of my universe, right? When my mom would go to the stores or to the mall, not grocery stores, but the department stores. I'm like, she knew, just drop me off at the arcade. Don't leave this space. I'll see you in an hour and a half. And so, then it obviously makes sense, right? And it's just like, okay, that's the era that I was steeped in. That's what I was raised on and reared on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And some would say that it's making a resurgence here in New Jersey. There's, I think, 3 arcade places within 30 minutes of where I live right now. So I guess people are rediscovering the joy of arcade gaming and fast-paced gaming, and the variety of design that's not just home game consoles. But going forward though, we touched on that question. We might as well get into it. What is the favorite game that you personally have designed? Is there one? I mean, it's one of those hard questions, like which one of your children is your favorite? So yes. Is there a particular game?
I would say the most favorite game that I worked on, that I designed on, would be the Midnight Club series.
Okay.
Yeah, the franchise. I got on with Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition, and that was a lot of fun. I hadn't worked on a racing game prior to that, but love racing games. And so it was one of those things where getting into it and kind of understanding, what this thing is, interacting with the city, building out the city, and then creating the races for those cities. So one of the things that we had to do is, you're given, the 3 different locales, right? So we had, if I can remember these now, there was San Diego, there was Atlanta, and shoot, I'm forgetting. It's been such a long time.
It's all right,
but that's you would have these locales, and essentially it's like trying to find pathways, right? Create races through these pathways that are unique and different. And, I was in a room with 6, 7 other designers who are also doing the same thing. So a lot of challenge in trying to find something new, trying to do something different, and something that's novel, at that point in time. But yeah, we would, create those races. And then we would also have to tune the AI, right? You know, the
Oh yeah.
players that you're competing against, the other
Mm.
racers. So, you know, we would have things where we would control like their nitrous when they would set up nitrous. You know, what's their optimal path, right? What's the percentages? Because, you know, there's branching. It's an open world, well, not really open world, but it's an open city. And so, you know, there's maybe different shortcuts or pathways, you know, that you can go. And then obviously the competitors themselves would also be able to take those. And so we would have, you know, basically setups like, okay, maybe we'll have, you know, this tuning setting for a racer that's going to be super aggressive, always tries to go for the shortcuts. Maybe there's one who's a little bit more conservative, right? You know, but has a lot of nitrous, you know, so we try to basically have a sense of conveying player types, player, you know,
personalities,
aggressiveness, personalities, you know, and try to do that within the context of how they race. So that was in Dub Edition. And then with Midnight Club Los Angeles, we obviously just had Los Angeles, a much bigger location, better graphics, obviously. And that one is probably, I'd say, is my most favorite game that I ever worked on and did the design for. By that point in time, I started getting into more of the world building. And so myself and another buddy of mine, Dave, we ended up doing basically R&D, right? So we had to drive out to Los Angeles and take reference shots and get a sense of like, you know, hey, what's the flavor? What's the vibe of these different areas? For those of you that have played Los Angeles, Midnight Club LA, we have all of the different locales, right? So we have the hills, you know, in the valley, we have downtown, we have, you know, the beach area, right? You know, we have Sunset. Later on, we added South Central in the DLC. And we would have to actually go to all these different locations, you know, take reference shots, get a sense of like, okay, hey, what kind of foliage, you know, are here, lamp posts, electric, you know, light posts and whatnot. And also too, just kind of the sounds, right? You know, you'll hear different things. So, you know, one of the things that we did when we went to South Central, and that's, I can do a separate podcast on that, is, you know, we went over to Watts, Compton, you know, all these areas in South Central, and we would get out and we'd walk, and immediately the first thing that I would hear is dogs barking, like a lot of dogs barking, right? And it made sense, right? You know, a lot of folks have them for security and things along those lines, you know, but then you would start to pay attention to, okay, what does the, you know, the surrounding areas look like? Oh, there's a lot of electricity lines going all around. And these are important because we wanted to have, you know, start to establish distinctions, right? Authenticity and distinctions gameplay wise, right? You know, and then how does that inform us on the design side of things, right? So, you know, South Central has a lot of, you know, electric poles. We're going to have these things now placed, you know, throughout, things that you need to navigate, you know, around or through, right? You know, so you start to see like from that perspective in a real world manner, how does that then influence you on the design side of it? How do you translate that in a manner that makes sense, you know, mechanically?
All right. For those of you who are listening, audience members who want to go into game design and game development, authenticity matters, because if you are looking for something that, if you are going to play a game that you have an intimate knowledge of in terms of the environment and everything, like making a midnight club in Manila or something like that, Midnight Club Manila, you would see lots of cats lazing about on the street, or, you know, you would see dirty little esteros that you can drive around and over. And that's the thing. JDM, Juan De Marcos did say Midnight Club Tondo. Hey, JDM, if we were going to create a Midnight Club game in Manila, it would be the entirety of Manila and maybe Laguna and maybe even Cavite. You know, I wouldn't be surprised.
Sir JDM did have a follow-up question here.
Here's a good question.
I heard Midnight Club Games featured vehicles from GTA. Is that correct?
Did it?
At that point in time, no. It was one of those things where, in terms of how Rockstar was at that point in time, we weren't necessarily sharing a lot of the same tech, right? You know, so the tech that was based, that they used in GTA was not necessarily something that we were using.
No, the thing about Midnight Club was it was very detailed. You could customize your car to the gears, to the transmission, to
about that.
They're all affected. The car car handling. Yeah.
So about the dub edition. So
Mm.
I watched a video regarding why it was called dub edition, and I'm like, is it because there's some voice acting was added to this game, or why is it called dub? Turns out it's because of the partnership with Dub Magazine.
Mm.
Magazine.
That's
Yes.
why it's
Yep.
called Dub
Yep.
Edition.
Yeah.
Because I thought,
So
oh, there's a dub. It's like an English dub edition or something like that. No, no, no.
yeah.
So one thing about Midnight Club 3 dub edition is that because you can customize your vehicles in this one before you race.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
So going with the customization, do you guys have to consult a lot of people who do a lot of car customizations just to get that right feel of it? Because
Mm.
of course you can't just pick up various rims and call it a day. That's it. Do
Yeah.
you have to
Right.
talk to some people about research or something like that?
Mm.
No, absolutely. And with Dub Edition, and then later on, with Los Angeles, clearly we're using real world vehicles, right, and from real world car makers, and so
Mm.
there is some do's and don'ts, right, that you can't do. One of the big ones early on, and this was universal, was that we had early discussions in terms of pedestrians, right? What can we do with pedestrians? And they're going to be obviously populated, throughout
Oh, yeah.
the cityscape, and as you're going through, what if you run into one, right? And so we explored very early on. It's like, okay, hey, maybe can we plow through them, right? Or maybe they bounce off the car, or whatever the case may be. And
Mm.
very early on, afterwards, and when we started having those discussions, the car makers came back and said, we cannot show our cars running people over. And so she's like, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, let's not do that. And obviously, it's going to be a different type of game if we start doing that as well, right?
This is not Grand Theft Auto, guys.
Right, exactly. So if you played the game, you'll notice that when the off chance that you do see a pedestrian, you just simply pass through that pedestrian, even though you would have obviously plowed them head on. So there's that.
When I did notice that a lot of them kind of dove out of the way, though. That
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So we would have basically, we would have it basically coded where they would have a proximity alert and then understand and know, like, okay, hey, the car is coming towards me.
Yeah.
Let me try to get out of the way. The problem is that that's not bulletproof, right? Obviously,
Yeah, that's true.
sometimes you'll get those, those situations where that will happen. So then, okay, go ahead and just pass through them. But yeah, so there's that, and then I'm sorry.
This is not like sorry, Jeff. Sorry. So this is not like Mortal Kombat, like when you can put a code, and then you can't. You're now allowed.
No. I mean, because obviously, then we're putting our licensing agreement on the at risk for that. So yeah.
Yeah,
and then that's why we have GTA, right? Obviously, and then GTA we didn't have that problem.
GTA. That's correct.
I've heard things about the licensing agreements. They can be extremely tough, especially when it comes to real world cars. So I imagine you guys had to wrangle a lot. But you were not involved in that in particular side. I imagine the company had to wrangle a lot of agreements and terms with these manufacturers. And it's still amazing as to how you guys got these real world cars into the game itself. So props to you guys. So that's good. Joe, you were about to ask a question.
Oh no, I'm still hung up on the fact that you guys took a written test just to be no, because when we had Sir Eric here the last time, he didn't mention anything about taking a quiz. And I'm like,
well, that's because Eric would have flunked that test. So yeah, that's why there was.
What were the questions?
Eric never wrote any bugs when we were in QA, so I mean, that's why.
That's the thing. I'll commend Midnight Club for a few things, but one of the most because of the fact that I play a few racing games too. I played Forza Horizon. I played Gran Turismo. A thing about Midnight Club that distinguishes it, aside from the real world designs, is the fact that the world, like Jeff says, it can be open world in the sense that you can choose your route. You can find different routes to achieve your objective. and that is a little hard to replicate even in modern days. Even if you try something like Forza Horizon and go a different route, it's still very limited as to the fact that you are racing a particular track. The way that you guys designed it, Jeff, it's pretty amazing. The way that Midnight Club 3 allows you to try to discover different parts of the city for you to be able to get to the checkpoints and finish the race. It's
Right.
It's quite innovative.
And it makes sense to do that too, right? Because we have the artists that are building these worlds, and so we want to show off it as much as possible, right? So it behooves us to do that, to show off like, hey, here are these locales, here are these different pathways. And what we ended up doing is, I mentioned we would create the races. We would basically be able to get a sense of like a heat map, right, of where certain areas are being used and aren't used enough. And we were like, oh, hey, there's this one section in, Detroit.
Everybody goes through.
Thank you. I think it was Ray that mentioned, I was trying to remember what the third location was. It was Detroit.
Detroit, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks very much for that.
But thank you for that. But yeah, and so we wanted to try to show those off as much as possible, so it makes sense, right? So much time, resource, and energy and talents going into it. So we need to we have that in our arsenal. So why not use it?
I have to admit, it's very it's very seldom replicated, even in modern gaming. About the closest one that I can imagine that came a little bit close to it was The Crew, Calling All Units by Ubisoft. Yeah, but aside from that, it's very hard to replicate, and that you could sense the dedication to detail that you guys put in on that one. So yeah, Joe.
So we tackled about the licensing of the cars. Let's talk about the licensing of the music, though. Because the music is also a big part of Midnight Club. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I wasn't involved in that. And so clearly our marketing group had a lot to do with it. And then also with our production team, with the producers. And then, of course, we're Rockstar, right? So there's that sense of like, we're just kind of we're part of the culture. And so, Joe, you asked about like Dub Edition, right? What that was. I had the same kind of reaction going into it with text Dub Edition. So then I would, Google it and take a look and like find out, oh, it's the magazine. And then clearly it's about car culture. But then there's, at that point in time, a lot of overlap, right, with car culture, and then also with hip hop, right? Really mainstream music at that point in time. And so with the music itself, one of their producers from New York, his name is Mark, was really, really into a lot of hip hop, and obviously being a New York guy, right? So it makes a lot of sense. And it just made sense in the context of, right? Made sense in the context of the franchise itself, right? So clearly had a lot of influence and a lot of impact in that regards. I wish I could say I was involved in the selection of the types of music, but I think at the end, what was curated, right, fit perfectly.
I was about to say that. Was the music that was given to you, did you know about the music beforehand when you made the design so that it kind of influenced the design of the game itself? Or was it something that you had to make sure, all right, this music likely will go here because this is how this design feels, this part of the game feels? How did that come about?
I wish I could say we had the foresight to do that, but that wasn't the case, right? So from the design perspective, we were really entrenched and focused in on creating a vibrant world. And then how do we interact with that world, and how can we create compelling races that are fun, and are challenging. But I think we knew early on that as an organization, that we're going to be leaning into a lot of these influences on the music side of things. And so then it's just really about like maybe on the art side of it, how we are going to convey that, right? As you start getting into Detroit, start getting into Atlanta, right? And clearly, those areas have very specific types of music that are associated with them. And so maybe at a high level with the execs, there was that sense of like, okay, we're going to need to curate, a playlist that will kind of jive with those different locales. But early on, to answer your question, Joel, no, we as on the design side of it, we
Mm.
really didn't have a sense of like what kind of music we're going to have. But I think we understood what the general vibe, the general
Okay.
energy, right, that we
Mm.
wanted to have, and I think that's pretty universal in that regards.
Yeah. All right. Very cool. Very cool. Midnight Club Edition, an amazing game. If you play it, you will discover that it's much deeper than it initially presents itself to be.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, uh, it's a pro. If you play the game Burnout Revenge, or if I remember correctly, it does include those powers too, like ramming, plowing against other enemies, and shouts that clear out the pathway. It's a proto
Yep.
Burnout. I kind of think of it that way. So yeah, it's. I would say you're saying that this being one of your favorite, if not your favorite, game design stands to reason. I can understand that. Yeah. But yeah, Joe,
And
you were about to say.
speaking of music, two
Mm,
other games come to mind
mm,
would be Johnny Mosley
Mhm.
and Tempo 32X.
mm.
Yep. Uh-huh.
So I would like to ask Sir Jeff a few questions about those games.
Sure.
But before he answers that, we will just do a quick ad break from StreamYard and BitMap. Don't go anywhere, and we'll be back more with Sir Jeff.
Yes.
Do you like playing video games? Do you like reading about history? Do you like learning about video game history? Then you should give yourself the gift of owning some video game history books from BitMap. Since 2014, BitMap Books have published numerous colorful and well-detailed hardbound books about video games, ranging from the different video game consoles of old and the various video game genres that will surely pique the interest of its core fanbase. BitMap's team of global video game journalists, players, and illustrators have produced numerous award-winning titles that celebrate the software, hardware, and developers that laid down the foundations for the billion-dollar video game industry we all know and love today. International shipping is also available with careful and considerate packaging from BitMap Books. If you don't want to take my word for it, then you can believe the people, almost 10,000 satisfied customers who submitted their glowing written reviews and video reviews after receiving their books from BitMap. By ordering your first BitMap book using our link, you will also be supporting the Timeless Gamers Show in spreading our love of video games and their rich history. Start your own online live streams, webinars, podcasts, online classes, and virtual presentations with Streamyard. By using Streamyard's user-friendly interface, you can also do simultaneous multi-streaming if you have accounts to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and other platforms. If live streaming is not your style, video and audio recordings are also available, especially with those who have variable and inconsistent internet connections. The finished output will still come out as clear and well articulated, exactly as you originally intended. You can also customize the appearance of your presentation, like green screen effects, facial touch-ups to smoothen out those facial blemishes, multiple cameras for multiple guests joining in the discussion, your own wallpaper on the background, adding your own logo as a watermark, sharing videos from your own computer or other website for added visual aids with or without audio, uploading your own background music if you wish to set the mood when talking, and lots more. Before you can enjoy all of the wonderful full features of StreamYard, you can start with a 14-day free trial by using our link. Not only that you are supporting the Timeless Gamer Show, but you can see it for yourself how easy it is using StreamYard. And welcome back to the Timeless Gamer Show, guys. And we are back with Sir Jeff. So, Sir Jeff, so we mentioned Tempo 32X and Johnny Mosley. So I'll go with Tempo first. I watch a few video gameplay footage of Tempo, and I'm like, how come I haven't heard of this game character before? He would have been a good mascot for Sega if if Sega was still around to
Yeah.
well, Sega is still here today, but if they're still on the console market as of today, because with Tempo, um, he's not as I mean he's not like Rystar and he's not like Sonic either. So
Right.
what can you tell us about this character and how and what his origin like?
So yeah, Tempo 32X. It's super special to me because it was actually my first lead testing role. So real quick, when you're in test, you have basically the leads for those titles, and then it's the lead's job to come up with test plans, and then assign those out, and then collate them also with the bug database. Essentially, kind of curate that and make sure that we're hitting a game on all different facets. So Tempo 32X is essentially this character named Tempo. His whole thing is that he is a hip hop grasshopper. And so the idea is that he is going through this world. It's a side scroller, and
Oh, he's a grasshopper. That
he's
explains
a grasshopper.
the
Yes.
4 arms.
Right. And so, yeah, that's why he has the 4 arms. And then, clearly, side scrollers. So now you're going to be presented with all these different enemies that you have to attack. And so, he had kicks. I believe he had a snap. So when he snaps, he had like a musical note that would come out that you would have to build up towards. And you can see like clearly there's a lot of stuff in here that are, based on music. You will see the musical notes. It's very flashy, a lot of
And he
eye candy
dances.
that's going on. So yeah,
And
a
he
lot
dances,
of fun. And then he had his girlfriend. I can't remember the girlfriend's name, but she would come along and help you out and assist you on your missions and throughout the levels. The reason why it didn't do as well, Joe, and it's a great question, because you look at this, right? It's like, this is actually pretty cool looking, right? There's a lot of color.
Yeah,
And
it's
kind of
amazing.
fun,
I wouldn't
right?
be surprised if this got released on Switch or on Steam right now. It would probably do really well, especially in this kind of environment that we have.
Right,
Indie
right.
games. Mhm.
I think the thing is that one of the things that just wasn't going to work for it from the start. So this was, as the title implies, it's 32X, right? So it's Tempo 32X, and for those that remember, the 32X was a really challenging system, right? One to sell. Because clearly at that point in time, Sega was not ready to move into the 32-bit space. And so they needed a way to try to bridge that gap and to essentially really just try to kind of elongate, the lifespan for the Genesis. So that's why we had the Sega CD. We ended up having the 32X. And so it was one of those things where I just think, you're looking at it from a business standpoint and just a pure number standpoint. The 32X didn't sell very well. And so, you're going to already kind of, hamstring and handcuff yourself in terms of just the pure numbers of how many players you can actually get, to be exposed to this game. And it was just really a shame because it was a fun game. I enjoyed the heck out of it. Really wish that, it could have been, it really probably should have just been on the Genesis from the start. But clearly there's a lot of things going on here that you just wouldn't have.
All right. So you did mention that it should have been on the Genesis. I mean, looking at the footage right now, I'm thinking the Genesis could have just handled this. I mean, graphics wise, does it really needed a 32X add-on for this game?
A lot of it was the music too, and I'm not sure if you listen to music, but there's a lot of different types of songs of music that's in it too, so that factored into it as well. But that being said, I think there's still ways that you can kind of design around that and work around it, right, and still be able to deliver and offer the same type of experience.
Because there's also the Super Tempo that was released for the Saturn, but I think that's only in Japan. I think.
Right. Yeah. I'm not as familiar with that one. So yeah. So obviously, maybe it did much better, and would make sense that it probably did better in Japan than it did here stateside.
I mean, looking at this, looking at the footage right now, Sir Joel, what can first impressions?
Well, it's very colorful. It moves smoothly, and like I said, It's very visually, and I we can't do music right now in this episode because of the fact that we would probably get copyright struck. That's one of the things about podcasts. We would
Yeah.
love to do a music concentrated episode. It's just that the number of times that we've done even clips, short bursts of music, always got us into legal problems with
Yep. Yep.
you guys. It's your own blasted fault for all of the
Sir,
not the
uh,
audience. I'm talking about our platform. So it's your issue. But I would say if I could hear this with music, if I could see this play together, it looks like definitely something that I would have either played before or I would actually spend money on now because of the great indie scene that we have in modern days. If you've at least followed some of the modern gaming scene, a lot of the games that have been coming out have been the visually appealing, the creative,
Mhm.
the kind of game that hews away from the triple A game nowadays. They make a lot of good money, and in this case, if this was released in modern times, in modern platforms like the Switch or Steam,
Mhm.
I would not be surprised if it made bank. So that is what is coming across to me right now with what I am seeing in the footage. Very colorful, very visually appealing. If I could hear the sound, I can imagine that I would be rocking to it as well. So yeah, I would definitely play this. I haven't had the chance. I would
Yeah,
love to
it's
give
it's
it a
really
go.
just a shame. Now watching this videos, and remembering all these, it's just like it was such a fun game, and I
Mm,
just think the platform I think just really just kind of doomed it from the start.
mm,
Just being on 32X just wasn't going to help it, and so but I mean, I'd always wanted to work on a platformer, right? And so it's one of those things where it's just like, oh, this is going to be cool, and just it not realizing that I think was just a huge shame, and I'm seeing Eric had mentioned he's never heard of this game, and rightfully so, right? It came in at a time that it just wrong platform, and obviously, with Nintendo doing what they were doing at that point in time, it's easy to have just gotten lost in the mire, right? And it's such a shame. Hopefully, maybe somebody that's out there now in the indie game space, can see this and say, hey, maybe we can bring it back. I don't know who still
mm.
owns the rights to it, but it's a game that I thought at the time when I was playing, it's like, this is a lot of fun, and I'm really enjoying it. But yeah,
Mm.
it just never really had a chance from the start, and that's unfortunate.
I would say for one of my friends here who often comes over and has guested in our podcast a couple of times, Greg Norris. If you get the chance, hunt this game down, give it a try. He's a platformer guy. He might really like this. And for anybody who is interested in it, give it a shot. If you can find the game, give it a try. I'd say.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, yeah.
if I'm going to describe Tempo 32X to the audio listeners,
Mhm.
imagine this was imagine Rocco's Modern Life meets Ren and Stimpy. All of the 90s music that you can get.
Yep.
That's Tempo.
Yeah.
And
um,
knowing the title Tempo, I haven't experienced the gameplay yet. Does it have rhythm aspects to it with the music? Like you said, you snap your fingers. Was it something that was part of the mechanic that you had to time it a little bit, or is it just automatic that it happens? Mhm.
If I can recall, I don't recall. I don't think that there was any elements in there of timing.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
it's been such a long time, so I
Yeah.
can't recall the
Holy cow!
specifics of those.
Really? Eric
So
Eric just mentioned something in the chats.
yeah, yeah,
$5
yeah.
grand
It's
for Tempo on eBay. Oh,
yeah.
Oh,
see?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, and obviously you start getting back that far back with the,
mm,
32X and
yeah.
Sega CD, even Saturn, right?
Mm,
Particularly if they're not wrapped or if
mm,
they're still wrapped in the original shrink. So yeah,
yeah.
I'd imagine, that
Uh-huh.
I'm not surprised by that.
And now
Oh, just
Eric is
kidding.
just
Just joking. Just joking.
well. Let me
Um,
say something. If I can interject, Joe. This aspect of retro gaming has always been near and dear to my heart because as retro gamers, we are constantly discovering games that we never had the chance to play before. Literally, there's thousands of games from bygone eras, all the way from DOS and arcades and everything that people are only
Mhm.
now rediscovering. How does it feel as a game designer and somebody who's actually had a major part in all of these games that are coming back out or are being rediscovered? How does it feel for you to hear people say, "Hey, I enjoyed this game so much," or "I just discovered this right now. I love what you did with it." How does it feel for you as a game designer?
It's very heartening, and I'm glad when I hear that. A lot of times I'll get reached out to from folks that, like, say, on LinkedIn or any other social
Mhm.
platform, when they find out that I worked on Midnight Club, as an
Yeah.
example, right? They're
Mhm.
like, "Oh my God, I love that game," right? I love how, the cities were, and that's my childhood, that sort of thing. So it's great to hear that and to feel like you were a part of somebody's childhood or part of somebody's life, even though you weren't there. And it's probably as close as I'll ever get to, like, filmmakers, right? In terms of, like, oh my God, your movie formed a lot of my life and informed a lot of things that I do, and things along those lines. So it's very heartening to hear that. But then I think the other part of it that always kind of go back to is, um, good design endures, right? Regardless of whatever technology comes about.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, it's really about that, right? It's about the designs, the mechanics, and how it elicits emotions and feelings, right? And the experience. And so that's why I think, obviously, with retro gaming being what it is, there is that retro, right, nostalgic part of it. But then there is something to be said about just enduring game mechanics and
Mhm.
design, right? That's timeless, and that will always be the bedrock of everything that comes now and in the future.
And that's also one of the reasons why I say Soulsborne games are making a comeback. Well, not
Mhm.
making a comeback; they're popular now because of the fact that game design, in that respect, is the fact that you endure hardship and you overcome it. That's
Mhm.
also really good game design. It shows you that, all right, you work hard, you get rewarded. It shows that part of the design of a game is there is something to strive for and something that you will get as a reward once you overcome all the obstacles. It's
Mhm.
basic game design, good game design, and all these old retro games people are discovering nowadays. If I just recently came from the Long Island retro convention, was that 2 weeks ago, Joe? I sent a gigantic pile of photos into our chat. People are all in on retro gaming, and some of the games that they are getting into, I would not be surprised if they were designed, tested, and or produced by Jeff here, right here. I wouldn't be surprised there. All right, so if Tempo, give it a try if you guys can find it. Not for the $5,000, but who knows? You might find it somewhere in one of your cousin's attics or basements. If you find it, give it a shot.
There's got to be copies out there, so
Oh
take a look
yeah.
at it. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think it deserves at least another
Um,
look see. But Joe, you also were asking about Johnny Mosley
Johnny
Matrix.
Mosley.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Let's go with Johnny Mosley. So
Mm.
I saw the game footage for Johnny Mosley, and truth to be told, it's a skiing game for
Yes.
you guys. For you guys who are curious, and the only sports game that I remotely would imagine being comparing it to would be Tony Hawk's Pro
Yes.
Skater. So
Yes.
I'm guessing you would. So I imagine you get a lot of that kind of comparison between the two, Sir Jeff. So
Yeah.
tell us more about Johnny Mosley, Matrix.
So much like 32X, having a special place in my heart because it was my first lead tester title. Johnny Mosley Matrix actually has a special place in my heart because it was actually my first game that I was working on in a design capacity. So I was an assistant designer at this point in time. So really my first go around in design. And you're correct. At this point in time, Tony Hawk was, the big thing at the time in gaming in general. And so it is a skiing game, but more accurately, it's what they call freestyle skiing. And so, and another kind of context too at this point in time was SSX was out, right? So that
Oh,
was really our
SSX
main.
Tricky was so
Yes,
amazing. Yes.
yes. So that was our really our main kind of
Inspiration.
reference in
Mhm.
terms of that. So you can see here, that you're doing you're skiing through. You have like different things you can kind of interact with. You'll have like half pipes, rails that you can grind against, berms that you can kick off of, and then do all the different tricks. The 180s, the 360s, grabbing of the pole, and things along those lines. And so it was based around a Olympian at the time named Johnny Mosley. He's from the Bay Area. And so this is when I was at the 3DO company. So this was over in Redwood City. And it just made sense for us at that point in time to go ahead and enter into a partnership with Johnny Mosley because, he's an Olympian and he's a freestyle skier. And so this is a poor video because whomever's doing this is not actually interacting with anything. I think they're just trying to do a speed run. But you'll see like there's all these different rails and stuff that you can grind against, and then you can do like different tricks and whatnot. But yeah, as I mentioned, this was my first real design work that I worked on. And those who remember and know 3DO, not exactly a company known for a lot of great games. Some of their bigger titles to note are obviously Army Men. So that was a great franchise. And then I can't remember what the other game was. Eric, you're here. You could probably tell us. It was along the lines of like the D&Ds. I can't remember the name of the franchise games that they had. Was it Might and Magic? I think it might have been Might and Magic. But those are really the claim to fame games that 3DO was known for. And so this was our way to try to kind of expand the portfolio and get into basically like the extreme sports, Johnny Mosley type of, or I'm sorry, SSX and Tony Hawk type of games, because obviously those are the ones that were the hotness at the time. And so not a great game, quite frankly, a little bit rushed. A lot of things didn't quite go our way. Physics aren't really all that great, but it was a great time in my life. I learned a lot from there. So I made a lot of mistakes in my designs of my locales. So there's several different locations that you can go through. So my locations were San Francisco and Washington, D.C. And the idea was, it's like, hey, what if it snows in these locations that aren't known for snow? Now, DC obviously is not.
According to the video, what if it snowed in LA?
Right, exactly. Right. That exactly was the whole conceit. So that's why you'll see like San Francisco in snow, and Los Angeles in snow. I think we also had like Machu Picchu, right? Which will get snow because it's so high up, but it's just like, hey, what if we make it like a winter wonderland and lean into that. But yeah, I learned a lot. San Francisco, like I said, was my first level. One of the things that I learned, and being on the testing side of things, like I'd mentioned, QA, you're kind of at the tail end of it, right? So you don't really affect too much the development, right, and the direction of a game. And so me getting into the designs part of it, where now I'm really in the beginning stages of it and working through to release, I learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned is that I need to communicate better with all of my different disciplines. I'll give a case in point. For those who have played Johnny Mosley Metrics, and I'm sure there's not a lot of you, but if you play San Francisco, because San Francisco is the first level in the first location in the game, you're going through and everything looks normal like you would expect San Francisco, except it has snow. But then later on, halfway through the course, it looks like San Francisco is decimated. Right. In fact, you end up at the Golden Gate Bridge that is all messed up. It looked like Godzilla went through it. Right. And you're like, what the hell happened? Clearly, San Francisco in California, we have a lot of earthquakes here, right? Or we can have earthquakes here. And so the conceit was, what happens if an earthquake hits the middle of the course as you're going through? And so that was the idea. And so then halfway through the race, you're supposed to get hit with some sort of a rumbling and sound effects that tell you, hey, there's an earthquake. And then from that point on, the rest of San Francisco looks like it's decimated. And so cool.
So
I designed it that way.
So the better quote would be, what if climate change happened in LA?
Right. right?
Specifically in
Functionality
LA.
creates the best
Okay.
players. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, Sir
What I
Eric
messed
said Road Rash. To answer your question, Sir Jeff, Road Rash.
Oh,
Oh.
that's it. Yes, yes, yes,
Road
yes.
Rash. There you go.
But what we ended up not doing was, and I didn't communicate this well enough, to whomever I needed to communicate it to, because I didn't know at that point in time, was we needed to have a screen shake and we needed to have the sound effects, right? To basically tell you, hey, something happened.
Yeah.
And we never got that. And it was one of those things where I realized this too late, and they were like, "No, we don't have the resources, to be able to do that." And I'm like, "Can you at least give me a screen shake or give me a sound effect that sounds like rumbling or something?" Because the players are just going to be like, "What the hell's going on, right? Why all of a sudden the San Francisco just decimated?" And never got that. So for those who have played it, I apologize. That is my fault. I should have followed up on that better, and I didn't.
Well, we learn something new every day, and well, that's something that you learn during that time, and you carry over into later designs. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, that's the part of being human. You learn from your mistakes, and you try your very best to never make the same mistake twice. That's
absolutely
that's my personal philosophy, and I imagine that that's something that you learned along the way too.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, Johnny Mosley. A game with some flaws, but it looks like it is fun nevertheless. In the same vein as SSX Tricky. If you guys are into the sports arcadey style of gaming, I'd say give it a go as well. So there. Now we come to my personal favorite of the games that you've designed. For those of you who are familiar with me here in Timeless Gamer Show, I am a huge advocate of fishing video games. And in this instance, Jeff is accredited as the assistant lead for one of my most favorite arcade style video games, Sega Bass Fishing, which was recently given as a free game on Steam, and it bumped up the player numbers a lot, and a lot of people have begun enjoying fishing video games because of it. Let me ask you, Jeff, how much research did you do into actual fishing when you went into designing Sega Bass Fishing?
So to be clear, at that point in time, I was still at Sega, so I had not yet gotten into the design portion of my career. So I was still in the Sega test team at that point in time. So I'm listed as the lead tester, and so
lead tester. Okay, no problem.
Yes. So so I wish I can claim that game, as a design credit, but I cannot. But it's a great game, obviously. It's interesting you mentioned it on Steam. My follow-up question was going to be, did they release it with a peripheral? Because it's really about having
they did not.
Peripheral.
That's the same. No, it's the fact that it's still very much playable with your usual controller.
Right.
Well, the thing about it is, as the tester, when you were going through testing the game, Sega Bass Fishing, when you were going into it, you were thinking, my question is, oh my God, this is a fishing game. It's going to be so boring. But, when you got to it, was it different from your expectations?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not, even though I'm Filipino, I don't fish. And I don't fish because it's kind of boring, outside of maybe the drinking parts of it, right? So that's me. I'm probably going to get flamed for that.
That's
Bring
fine.
it on. But that being said, when it came into the test department and we played it, it's a lot of fun. It's such a fun game.
It is,
And the fact that you had the different locations, right? And it's really about kind of casting your lore and putting out there, and then you have the different lores. And then just seeing like, oh, there he is, and
exactly.
you're kind of talking, to it's like, okay, come on, you little bastard. Grab that lore, right? And then when he does, and then especially on the peripheral, and then it shakes and stuff like that. You have to reel him in and stuff like that, and you're actually starting to kind of get really into it. And it's like I said, I don't fish, so this is the closest I'm ever going to get to actual fishing. But it was so fun, and the fact that they made fishing, what I think is a super mundane kind of activity, super fun and compelling. I think it's just incredible. And it was such a great game, and it's a great party game.
Oh yeah,
I would bring it home, and everyone just like they'd say the same thing. They're like, fishing.
fishing,
Who wants to help
exactly.
me fishing? But it's almost like a very social communal thing too, because everyone's like, oh hey, there's a fish over there, there's a fish over there, and then everyone would talk to the screen like, come on, you little bastard, come on, get that little, or,
You know
so
what?
yeah,
I think the misnomer with people is that, oh, you're just fishing. But
Mm.
Mhm.
but what's the thing about people missing about these games is that
Mm.
it's you versus the fish.
Yes,
Not all the times that you just toss a lure and then they're gonna bite. No,
Mm.
you need to fight for them for you to reel them in. So
Mm.
yes,
there's also the struggle. And
Mm.
with fishing games now, I mean, compared to what they were before,
Mm.
yeah, sure, that was a thing. What
Mm.
one once they bit the bait, that's it. You're gonna catch the fish. But now,
right,
as our technology evolved, a lot more nuances were being added to it.
Mm.
Now you get a lot more factors to consider, right? Not to mention
absolutely,
how
Also,
heavy
there you
how
go.
heavy the fish is, where you're fishing, salt water, fresh water,
Mm.
yes,
humidity, temperature, the struggle, the lure, the pull,
Oh, that's a big one. Look at
the
that.
tensile strength of your strings. All of
right,
that plays
19
in,
pounds.
right?
Dang.
yeah. And the one thing I'm reminded about this too, as well as when we were going through it, and this is like I said, towards the tail end of my career in
Mm.
testing, and I really wanted now to start breaking into design, is
Mm.
this idea and this notion of like, how in the hell are they making a mundane, activity like fishing so fun? Right. And so it started to dive into kind of the nuances and the mechanics of it. And clearly there's all the things we had just talked about, right?
Mm.
There's built-in mechanics of like, okay, hey, how big are these things that you're getting, right? And record size. But there are just little things in terms of like, okay, you have these tree trunks that are in there, right? That
Oh yeah.
speaks to the design of
Mm.
itself. What's
Obstacles,
the
yes.
environment, and
Mm.
then you have the different lures. But then even beyond that, and those are really kind of baseline things at the end of the day. But then how do you actually then embellish on top of that? And one
Mm.
of the things that I'm reminded of is, and what we don't have here is the sound, right? And
Mm.
when in some ways that it kind of trolls you, it's like, oh, small one, right? Even how they would say it,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
I was
Wah,
gonna say
wah,
that.
wah.
I'll,
Right,
I'll comment about that in a moment.
right,
It became notorious for bad what's the right word for it? For trolling you in essence,
yeah,
basically.
right.
Bad voiceover, and whenever you made a bad move,
Hey,
like
hey,
yeah, things like that.
it's not as bad when you
Mm.
miss the duck in Duck Hunt, where the
Well,
dog
yeah, that's true. Yeah, that
leaps
is
at
Right,
true.
you,
right.
right? It's not like that. I mean, fuck that dog. But here in the fishing game, if you
I always
miss,
wanted to shoot
the
that
game
dog. They
will
didn't allow
let
you
you
to shoot that
know that
dog.
you suck.
Well, the thing
If I
about
was
it
a
is,
designer back then, I would have allowed you to shoot that dog
yeah,
after 15 minutes.
exactly. That's the thing. Joe has actually watched me play on stream modern day fishing games, and he does make a very good point about how detailed modern fishing video games are. They still have the tension, they still have the drama, they still have
Right.
the sense of you against the fish. But Sega Bass Fishing distilled the essence of fishing into the fight itself, into
Yes. Yep.
your commanding mentally the fish to bite, and the fish mentally fighting that command, and then you once it actually does, then it's a struggle to get him close without the
Right.
line breaking. That's good game design. It does distill the whole thing. Remove the sitting around getting bitten by mosquitoes, remove the getting completely drunk and wasted on beer while you're waiting for a bite. That all
Hmm.
goes out the window. It boils it down into the most essential part of the fishing, the
It,
fight
it's
itself.
only guys. It's only mundane if they
Mm.
did fishing in real time,
Well, yeah,
yo.
that's true. That's true. Yeah. John knows exactly what I'm talking about because he saw me do the stream. But yes, in your testing of it and the way that you saw it, and you said that it kind of inspired you into how you were going to be going forward with design. You did say that it surprised you as to how they could make a game a topic as mundane or as deadly boring likely in real life into something that is interesting.
Right.
was it something that moved you going forward as a designer? How
Yeah,
did you?
absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that you start to realize, as you move through at being a designer, is that you're really bringing in all the different senses, right? All the different elements, right? So, from the tactile rumble of the fishing lure, or I'm sorry, the fishing peripheral, to the sounds, and then even something as simple as, again, we talked about, it's like, oh, small one, right? Or, oh, it's a big one, right?
Yeah.
And how that's being delivered, and how that elicits you as a player, right? Either, you're getting trolled. It's like,
Mm,
I want to get back in and do that again, right? Because I can
yeah,
get a bigger one. Or, oh, I got a big one. Let's see what's bigger, right? And
exactly.
at the end of the
It's a
day, that
small
really
one.
goes towards design, right? How do we elicit those emotions? How do we elicit, that reaction from the player? Then they'll be like, I got to go back in and I got to do that again. Whether I got trolled and I need to do better, or I got the best score and I want to try to top it again, right? Those are really, at the end of the day, just really basic kind of human traits that we have, and it's really about trying to tap into that as best we can.
I
Oh,
think
joining
Dan.
us,
Mm,
we got one of the hosts of the Sega Mega Master Show, Sir Dan.
Hey, you got me on, mate.
yes, we have you on, Dan.
I don't know what. Here we are. Sorry, mate. Here we are. Sorry. How we doing? All right.
Yeah, everything's good. Dan Faulkner of the Sega Mega Masters, and also a co-panelist here on Timeless Gamers Show. We are extremely happy that she's here, and I know Dan has also given Sega Bass Fishing a couple of tries too, right, Dan?
I have. Yes. I mean, obviously, I'm a big Sega man anyway. Fishing's not my thing at all. But so Joe, we like to throw games around to test each other, to try each other at Timeless Gamer. So
Yeah.
Joe got me into bass fishing, and like I say, it's I'm pretty rubbish at it. But what I am, the few plays I have had it's it's addictive. I can see why you're into it so much, mate. So it's good job. I mean, your stuff, Jeff. I'm a Mega Drive man, really, mate. I'm a Sega Genesis man. So all the games you tested on there is that's why I've come to worship you for half hour, mate. So good work. But yep, Sega Bass Fishing. Good work, mate. Good work.
Thank you much. Thank you, and thank you for your support all these years. So it's great talking about all these old games.
It's
There's
really...
there's a comment here coming from Sir Carlo, one of our OG panelists in the show. He says that my favorite Jeff Junio game is Clockwork Knight.
Yes.
Pepperucho, how do you say this? Pepperucho of Clockwork Knight rock the Keyblade better than Sora. So what can you tell us about Clockwork Knight?
Yeah, so again, another game that I tested on, and I was one of the testers. And this was actually pretty early on in my career at Sega in the Sega test department. So and I'm not sure if Eric had dove into this on his, but essentially, as a tester, we go in and we have a big board, and it has all the games that are in test at that point in time, and then you see what you're assigned to. And Clockwork Knight was one of those titles. And remember going through it, obviously at that point in time, looked, amazing to me. I love the kind of the conceit, of this, this whole idea of like the knights, and then with the background and all the different characters and how it looked. Clearly a fun game, and clearly, one of those classics. Again, another game that I wish I could have said, I had a hand in design, but, I was still a young punk, 23, 24-year-old at the time. So, just getting started, but incredible, amazing game. Obviously we've all played it. So we know exactly what that game's about. So great game, great fun game.
Another one game here that Sir Dan might be familiar with, Guardian Heroes. So with the Guardian Heroes, arguably one of the best beat 'em up games for the Sega Saturn that was released and being ported to the Xbox Live Arcade. So tell us more about what was your involvement with Guardian Heroes.
Yeah, so with Guardian, I was again one of the lead testers on those, and so we had to generate the test plans for those, and clearly with Guardian Heroes, it's actually a pretty big game, right? And you mentioned that it's a beat 'em up, and I think that's really a part of it because there's some RPG elements that are in there, right? You have your different XP that you have to you have different characteristics and different strengths that you can assign them to. And so there's that aspect. A lot of kind of Street Fighter or fighting game elements into it because you have a lot of those same type of motion. So if you were really into Street Fighter at that point in time, you do pretty well in this game. And then clearly we have the 3 different planes that you can fight on. So that was something new and different at that point in time. I mean, look at the art on this one, right? It's just incredible in terms of how it looks. There's a lot of things going on, and it is supported up to 6 players. So on the Sega Saturn, you had the 6-player multi-tap. So you can play up to 6 players. So you can see here that you can, give your points to whatever, abilities that you want to soup up. And yeah, just super fun, branching storyline. So you would get to certain points of of a path and said, oh hey, let's go into the village to help them out, or let's go into the forest, right? Or we'll go to this fishing village, and then you would then basically progress through there, and then depending on your choices you would get different endings. So a lot of things going on in this game. And it's just super fun. My God, the amount of times that it's one of those games where if you get lucky and you are on a game that's super fun while you're testing it, it didn't feel like you're working, right? Because it's
Right.
so fun. You're driven to just keep playing and keep doing the things you need to do, as opposed to if it's a game that's just super boring or whatever, or super buggy, then it's a little bit tougher, and you're earning your pay in that regards. But this was such a fun game. And it's one that I just really wish got a bigger reception than it did. Obviously, being on Saturn, didn't help out. But it's one of those games that I think still holds up, and it's just beautiful. And yeah, I didn't really get a chance to see it when it landed on Xbox, but from what I understand, it was pretty well received there as well. And I'm not surprised. Again, I mentioned earlier, great design indoors, regardless, of whatever era it's in.
A follow-up question would be... Oh,
wait. I think
Dan.
Dan has a question.
Oh, Dan,
do you ever feel... I mean, like I say, I'm a huge Sega fan, Jeff, and I spend probably most of my working day on the internet winding people up, especially Nintendo fans, that Sega are like forgotten in I mean, a lot of these games, like you say, Guardian Heroes is a perfect example of a game that brilliant game, deserved a bigger audience. Mm-hmm. And do you kind of feel like a lot of the games that you worked on, that's a general case for a lot of them? Because with a lot of modern audience, it's only really us old school hardcore fans that tend to remember and still play them. Do you right. still feel that yourself? And are the games that you think, like Guardian Heroes, I wish this had got more recognition?
Well, absolutely. And you weren't here earlier, Dan, when we were talking about it, but Temple 32X was also another one that was one of my games that I led. And so it's one of those things where it's just a shame, given the history and where things were at that point in time with Sega as a corporation and as a business, that we just didn't really have, the audience and the eyes on it, right? So with 32X, that made total sense, right? Not as much hardware sold, compared to Genesis. And then, we can have a separate podcast clearly on Saturn, right? And the failings and what happened there, so clearly games like Guardian Heroes, I think go under the radar. Another one that I worked on, super proud of, is Shining Force 3 on the Saturn.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. Now, clearly that has a little bit more of an audience because, it came in from Genesis, but I don't think it gets as much love because of the fact that it came in on the tail end of the Saturn lifespan, right? Its life cycle, so yeah, it's one of those things where it is a little bit of a shame, and then, you compare that against what was going on at the time, with Nintendo, and then, you had Sony rearing its head with PlayStation, and then eventually, clearly Xbox and Microsoft were going to be coming in. So it was a uphill battle, clearly, for sure. But I think it's one of those things where it's worthwhile looking back and revisiting some of these titles. So I'm glad we're talking about them.
Yeah, definitely, mate, definitely. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I feel until Streets of Rage 4 came out, Streets of Rage 3 to me was the best beat 'em up ever made. To me, yes. I think it was king of the genre, top of the genre. I know a lot of people like Streets of Rage 2, and Streets of Rage 2 gets a lot of recognition, but I think Streets of Rage 3 has just got better gameplay, and I like that it's more challenging. I know. To be fair, I know you worked on Comic Zone and Eternal Champions with Eric as well. So I know it strikes me that you might be a man that likes a game to be challenging.
Oh, absolutely. Clearly. Yeah. And that was, quite frankly, the way it was back then, where it's just like the games were designed to be harder, right? And someone alluded to the fact like nowadays you have patches and you can have expansion packs, right? And so it really was in this little disc or this little cart, right? That you need to pack it as much as you possibly can and get your money's worth, right? Back then the games were $50, $60. So you needed to be able to get, your money's worth in that regards. So out of necessity, it needed to be much harder for sure. Gamers today, I think, are a little bit pampered, but it's challenging in its own ways, right? Obviously, but I'm an old guy, so I'm gonna have that, and that's the hill I'm gonna die on.
Well, there's two things that I need to say. First, to Eric in the audience right now, I'm gonna have to get you for that pun. I play fishing games just for the halibut. I'm gonna have to get you for that one, okay? Eric, you owe me for making me snicker inside of my nose for that one. Another thing is, somebody for Jeff directly. Has there been an experience? We've been talking about the positives this whole time, but was there an experience as a game tester that afterwards made you feel like, damn, I never should have done that, or it's a moment of regret, like, how could I possibly let that get past me? So something like that. Was there a moment for you on that?
So, I mean, in terms of the, like, say from a testing perspective, not really. I think as a group, because, it's a group effort, right? And we had a whole bunch of testers. And so if something did get past us, right, then usually more than likely, it's something that is super duper outlier, right? In terms of like, it needs very specific reproduction, repro steps, right? So not necessarily gonna feel too bad about that. The one thing that, however, and after it happened, didn't feel so great about it, and I had to kind of learn to reconcile and make peace with it. I mentioned earlier Shining Force 3. That one is notorious for me because, let me set the background, the context. So this was at the end of the Sega Saturn run, right? Towards the end of it. But we weren't ready yet to release Dreamcast, right? So it was going to be maybe another a year to 6 months out still. And so we needed to support Saturn as best that we can. And not surprisingly, some of the best games for Saturn came out towards the end of it, right? So you had Burning Rangers, you had Panzer Dragoon, you had Shining Force 3, right? And so it made sense that by that time, now a lot of the developers were starting to understand and know how to work with the Sega Saturn. And so clearly some of the best work started coming out at that point in time. And with Shining Force, the other part of that is that we had downsized considerably, right? Clearly the heyday of, I mentioned before that we at one point had 3 different shifts, right? With a day, night, and a graveyard shift. We then obviously scaled down to just, one shift. And so you can kind of see, like, just even from an everyday kind of logistical standpoint, that things are starting to kind of get scaled down. And with that also came resourcing, right? And budgeting and all those things that come with running a business. And so, we were basically committed to doing Shining Force 3. And one of the things that they wanted to do was they asked us, like, hey, clearly it starts off in Japan. Do we want to do English voices for the for the game? And we're like, yeah, if we can do that, clearly, I don't know if we have the budget to hire, professional voice actors, but if it's in the budget and we can do it, then why not? And he goes, well, the catch is that we're going to have to do it internally. And so I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, people from the test department, folks from Sega, right? From HR or wherever, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm the lead designer on this. I'm like, let's go ahead and do this, right? I think this is something that would be fun. And so, okay, so they tasked it to me to basically cast all of the voice actors as they were, right, for the game. And so we had the different roles, for the different characters in the game. And I'm, lead tester on this one. I decided to cast myself as the main character of the game. And so the character that you are going to hear 95% of the time throughout the entire game. And I don't know if this is like, translating right now as I'm speaking, but I hate my voice. I don't like how my voice sounds when I hear it on playback. So I'm just one of those people. So maybe it hits me differently. But yeah, we ended up going in and I cast a whole bunch of folks from the test department, from HR, the gal that runs the front desk, and all these other things, just say, hey, do you want to be in the game? And so they said, yeah. So then we the producer gave us, the scripts, gave us the lines, and we went into, at the time, Sega had a recording studio that's on the premise. Right. So we went in there, and for those that know, like with Pixar and all these other big movies, when you do recording sessions, it's a session and it is a process, right? And it can go for several weeks, if not months, right? We had basically, if I remember, maybe 2 hours to do the recording for, I want to say there was almost a dozen of us, with several different lines, each of us, 5 to 6 lines, right? So that's going to take time to do, or it should. But we have to squeeze it into 2 hours. And clearly you're supposed to have done right multiple takes, right? Well, maybe we had 3 takes at most. And so it's one of those things where we went and did the best that we could. And some people are actually really good. I mentioned my buddy Chris. He did some voices on there. Another guy named Mike did some voices, and they knocked it out of the park. Some others, like myself, not so much. And so I'll leave it at that. It's still in the game. And in fact, if you Google it and you Google Shining Force 3 voice acting, you will. I think there was a site. I haven't checked it out in a while, but somebody went through the trouble of parsing out like the actual sound files for the American voices, and you'll hear it, and it'll be clear which one I am. And it's just horrible.
I'm gonna look for it. I'm gonna look for it.
Horrible. But now you know what though. I've made peace with it because I can say I'm in a game and I'm in one of probably the best games, right? On the Sega Saturn and a renowned franchise like Shining Force. So
it kind of helped you touch back onto your original plan of being into movie
in Hollywood
and everything.
Movies, right?
Yeah. So yeah, but I finally made peace with it, and so I don't cringe nearly as much now when I hear it. But
don't
take a look at it. Like obviously, please.
Lean into it. That's always my philosophy. Just
right.
Yeah.
This is who I am. Hey, take it or leave it.
So that means on the final cut of the game, we can hear your voice or somebody else's.
Oh yes. And
it's
along with
you.
everybody
All right.
else.
I'm
everyone else.
Use that.
I remember at the time when I would look online. This is in the heyday of the internet, and I would look on like the boards, and I don't know why I would do it. I guess I'm a glutton for pain. But they'd be like, "Yeah, who the hell did the voice recording for this? It sounds like it's the janitorial or custodial staff at Sega." And I'm like, "That's not too far off." I mean, we were at Sega. And I didn't take out the trash at the time, but even though my voice is trash, so whatever.
I mean, heck, it makes for a great story and it makes for good memories. That's the important thing about it. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right. Sir Dan, do you have any questions?
You muted Dan.
I think Dan is muted. Dan, you're okay. There you go. Up.
Sorry about that.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
There it is.
Yeah, I mean, your gaming CV is huge in it, really, and it's I've probably got about probably 10 of my favorite games of all time in that CV, Jeff. So I've got so much I could ask you, to be honest. I mean, I don't know if the guys have already mentioned it, but I'd like to know what would you say your top 3 or 5 favorite Sega games to work on were?
Mm-hmm. He did
see.
mention one already, which is Midnight Club. You know, that
Right.
was.
But I think with Sega in particular, I would say Guardian Heroes right off the bat. I think that's just speaks for itself. I don't know if you guys remember, Dan, you probably do. It's Shadowrun.
Oh yeah, mate. Yeah,
Shadowrun.
yeah.
Oh,
Love
yeah.
that game. That
Shadowrun.
game is so awesome. It's much better in my opinion, or it's a different game, obviously, than the one that's on the SNES. But
Yes.
love that one. Super fun. Eternal Champions, both the Genesis and the Sega CD.
You have heard that they're doing was that a TV series, Joe, or
They're
a
doing
live
a movie.
a movie? Was that Dan?
Yeah, they're doing an Eternal Champions movie. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really? No, I have not. Really?
Yeah.
That would be well. Okay, I'm gonna hold off on like comments until I see like,
Okay.
who the actors are, because we clearly know like this can go sideways really fast depending on who's involved.
I mean, obviously, we were lucky enough to have Eric on the Sega Mega Masters and Joe Adam on Timeless Gamer too, and we've spoken about our creative Eternal Champions, and that as a kid, that and the fatalities is what really sold it to us young kids. To me,
Yes,
definitely. Yep. So I do think the premise is there for a great movie. I mean, because let's be honest, right? I mean, I'm not dissing Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter or that as games and series. They're fantastic. Street Fighter, especially, I love Street Fighter. But the premise is pretty, pretty mundane, really. I know they've got backstories with Bison and all that, but it's not Eternal Champions premise of here's your heroes in time. You save them before they die, and then they go into a tournament. Is so much more. As a kid, I was like, wow, that's really drew me into the world, to the ethos and all that. So I think it's definitely got potential to make a good movie. Yeah. Whether they actually make a good movie out of it, we will see.
I have to admit, I mean, about the closest thing lore-wise to Eternal Champions would probably be World Heroes, if anybody remembers that series. Yeah. World Heroes is about as close as possible to that one. But I think the movie industry is now discovering how lucrative video game properties are, because there have been a ton of video game properties that have made the transition into movies. Although it's not all of them have been, have made money, like Borderlands recently. The Borderlands movie, I hear, did not make bank. But other series like The Last of Us on TV has been a critical and financial success. So stuff that Jeff and Eric have worked on before, I wouldn't be surprised sometime in the near future will make the transition into the big screen or the household screen. So
I mean,
it's a treasure trove, right, of old stuff.
Exactly, mate. I love that you mentioned Shadowrun as well, because when we're talking about game to movie, there we've got one of the best, in my opinion, tabletop to game adaptations. You know what I mean? That's like you say, the SNES is kind of like a point and click adventure game, and it's not bad. I really like it, but the fact that the Sega version is so much more nearer the tabletop game just gives it so much weight, and it's so more expansive and for me it was a much deeper game. So I'm glad you think it's better than the Nintendo version as well. That's something else I like to wind Nintendo fans up about.
Yeah, I mean, totally different game and a different feel, but yeah, Shadowrun was so fun. And then I guess maybe to just kind of close out like some of my other favorites, and not necessarily Genesis, but during my time at Sega, would be Virtua Fighter, and then Virtual On. Virtual On is such a great game. I'm a big, kaiju, robot fan, and so that was definitely in my wheelhouse, and being able to kind of have like these battles in this arena with different types of skills and different weapons. So those are the other standouts that I love, and I just wish those got a little bit more love than they did. Clearly in the 3D fighting space, right? Virtua Fighter doesn't necessarily get as much love as it probably deserves and needs.
So we're quite lucky with Virtua Fighter and Virtua On. And so Joe's just playing through the series at the minute. That they are actually including in the Yakuza games, obviously. So at least part of me, I'm glad I can at least get people to try them now, because Virtua On's a perfect example of a game that is such a lovely game. Just when you want a quick blast on something, when you just want to get it, bing bang bong, blast on it, it's a fantastic game to do that. And Yakuza has introduced quite a younger audience to it. So at least some of those games are still getting some slight recognition. Nowhere near as much what they deserve, but at least Yakuza's giving them some exposure. So we're just it's just, I just find it a real shame, really. I look at when I see these modern best ever retro gaming lists, and I think I've played all those, and I've played loads more, and I wouldn't have 9 out of 10 on my recommendations list. But like I say, I'm a Sega man, really, so I'd just put all Sega stuff on there.
I don't know if you can see it, but I have like my Sega shirt with all the different systems.
That looks pretty cool. Nice.
So just for that, and then also no product marketing whatsoever.
no product placement.
And proceeds to raise his mug that actually says Sega right there for the video, for the audio audience. That's what Jeff is doing right now. Okay.
So we're almost on the 2-hour mark of the show, unfortunately, and we're having so much fun talking with Sir Jeff. So one last question, probably from me. And we had Sir Eric answer this question the last time he was here, and he gave a very detailed answer. So we would like to hear what Sir Jeff's answer to this one. So you came to Sega around 1993. That's the high. That's arguably the highest point Sega ever got, and then it went to decline after 2 years with the 32X, the Sega CD, and then Saturn, then ultimately the Dreamcast, right? So looking back, if it's up to you, what would be the actions that you would have taken differently to keep Sega afloat in the console gaming that we have right now? Because if things would have turned out differently, we still would have Nintendo, Xbox, PlayStation, and Sega.
So
if it's up to you,
here's the thing, and it's a question that I've thought of a lot, and went through quite literally, right? I was there during the decline, and then through the hoped for renaissance, right? With the Dreamcast. I don't know that it's hard to say. I think from a business standpoint, clearly there was a lot of mistakes that were made. I think one was the whole idea, we should make porn games. That probably would have been pretty cool, or not. But anyways, with the Genesis, I think the business decision to try to elongate that product as long as possible through Sega CD, through 32X, at the time made sense. But I think ultimately what it just did is it just kind of hastened it, right? And they were just really just band-aids at the time, right? Trying to keep that base. But the problem is unless you had a as close to a 1-to-1 ratio of Genesis to 32X or Sega CD, it just wasn't going to be a sustainable model, because you're really now looking at, like, say, a quarter of the potential player base of Genesis for 32X or Sega CD, and then maybe even a smaller one for 32X, right? So from a pure number standpoint, that's just going to be very difficult to try to maintain. So then the answer is, leaning into probably more so on the Genesis, right? If you recall, they were doing stuff where you can have, like, extra chips on the cart, right? With some of the Sonic games. And so maybe that's something that could have been done to maybe help elongate that. The other thing then is clearly there's a move now towards, 3D gaming and the 32-bit era, right? And I think they being Sega, stayed a little bit too long in the 16-bit era and didn't invest enough research and development into the Saturn, right, soon enough. And then we all know, like when the Saturn was developed, it was primarily, you know, a 2D monster, right? And then when PlayStation came out, clearly, you know, 3D gaming was their main focus, and it obviously, you know, raised some eyebrows at Sega, and it's like, well, shoot, we're going to need to do something with that. So the answer was, let's just throw on another chip, you know, onto the board, and it clearly, from an architectural standpoint, it's going to pose a lot of problems, and not problems, but challenges, right? You know, and trying to kind of work with it and do it in such a way that it makes sense. So really investing in the R&D much sooner, maybe having the foresight of understanding and knowing, like, hey, 3D is the wave of the future, you know, and so maybe having that. So there are those things, right? You know, from just a purely kind of hardware business side of it. The other part of it, and one things that we actually asked questions about while I was there, is we would have, you know, company meetings where we all get together and, you know, see the latest games that are coming in, the latest advertisement. And one of the things that, you know, was clearly iconic about Sega was the Sega Scream, right? You know, Sega. And so they moved away from that. I don't know if you guys remember that, but at some point in time, and I think it's because we ended up changing advertising companies or something like that. So clearly the new folks coming in don't want to do what the previous ones are doing. They want to try something new, but they moved away from the Sega Scream. And so I think from a marketing standpoint, that was also probably a bad call to make as well. Would that have been enough to offset all the stuff that was coming? I don't know. I'm not sure. And then, you know, history shows, well, you know, the one thing that I'll do, and it's not necessarily on the Sega side of things, is I will talk to Nintendo and tell them, hey, don't screw over Sony. Because what's going to end up happening is they're going to come in and they're going to kick everybody in the face and take your lunch while they're at it, right? And so
agreed.
I would have begged Nintendo, hey, you know, stay in bed with Sony, right? They're what's best for you, because that clearly we know then what ended up happening. You know, after that, Sony says, you know what, screw you. We're going to go ahead and do this thing on our own, right? You know, so maybe that's what I would do if I had a time machine and go back, is really try to, you know, convince Nintendo that Sony is what's best for them, you know. But on the Sega side of things, I don't know. You know, I don't know that we might still, with all the things that I had mentioned, maybe, you know, there's barely enough space for 3, right? 4, I don't know is sustainable. So I don't know that. Maybe it was just kind of natural, and maybe that asteroid that was coming to us was always going to come to us, and there's really no, you know, Ben Affleck or, you know, no way to divert, you know, this asteroid that was coming toward us, right? You know,
Armageddon, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
For all
So,
you
yes.
kiddies. Okay.
Yes. And Bruce Willis, you know, obviously, yes.
Oh yeah.
Just to extend that, what actually gets me though is, I think you're right. I think from a pure gimmick and a pure sales point of view, 3D was so overwhelming. It was always going to run away with everything. No matter, it weren't really about the quality of the games. I personally didn't like early 3D. I bought a PS1 and a N64, and I thought the PS1 was okay. I like the cinematic games like Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid, but I hated the N64. I really did. I thought it was just janky, you know, poor games really. And so I carried on. That's why I stayed so in touch with the Mega Drive stuff, is because I just carried on buying 16-bit games. I just the gameplay for me was so, you could tell that the developers, the testers, everybody was so they mastered the craft. They really had mastered that, you know, they spent 10, 15 years mastering 2D games, and it still is to me today peak gameplay. I'm not saying that other games haven't, you know, broadened it in sense of depth and presentation and other elements. But if I want to play a game and I want pure gameplay, excitement, buzz, that's why I play Sega Mega Drive, because that to me is the ultimate. But I also find now that arcade stuff is more relevant now. You know, there's if I'm playing a 60-hour RPG, a 100-hour game, whatever, I want arcade games to break them up. And the perfect example for me is Streets of Rage 4 again. It sold Sonic Frontiers. Sonic, Sega's big mascot, sold 3.5 million in his latest game. Streets of Rage 4, a 2D beat 'em up, which they probably produced for like a tenth of the cost, that sold 3 million. So it's one of Sega's biggest selling games. I know a lot of that will be as nostalgia, guys, but it's there. It really is there. So is that anything that you'd ever be tempted to push now? Could you ever see like an arcade or an old school 16-bit style boom if it came accompanied with the right branding?
Oh no, absolutely. And I don't think you were here when I mentioned this earlier, Dan, but like one of my comments is that, great design endures, right? Regardless of whatever, technical feats or, capabilities that we have. And so I think it's one of those things where it's actually, if I get asked the question a lot of times, like, from would-be designers, like, hey, what can I do to, get in design? And my answer is, and there's so many different resources now, right? For people to get into, with all of the freeware, that you can do and create games and stuff like that. And I said, really just dive into, actually creating your own game. It can be shite, right? And, and it will be, but that's how you're going to learn, so learn about that. And then, lean into design philosophies, right? Solid design mechanics, right? At the end of the day, because that's what is going to carry it. And so then if you have those, then that will always serve you. You'll always learn all the other stuff, right? As you kind of go along. And so that's why now, like when you look at like some of the retro, I think that's why they still resonate, right? Because it is based on a lot of strong designs and mechanics, right? That still endure. And so I'm not surprised that there's a renaissance for that. And then people starting to kind of go back and looking at some of the old games, right? Because quite frankly, very, very, very rarely do you have something that is so totally novel that it just breaks the mold of everything that came before it, right? Everything is always really just, a reinterpretation of what came before, right? And how can we make it fresh and new? And so I think for that, that's clearly, a source, a resource for people to look at. Kind of diving back into what you were saying with the 3D stuff. I agree with you. Like, I love all the older stuff, hand drawn, whatever the case may be, 2D. But, from a business standpoint, and right or wrong, right, and for us purists, especially back then, it's like, it's really whatever delivers like the best gaming experience. And clearly at that point in time, 3D was not necessarily that place, right? I mentioned Virtua Fighter, is one of my favorite games. Well, you look at the original Virtua Fighter versus, Virtua Fighter 2, right? It's night and day. Yeah. But once they bridged that gap, right, then it just became something, undeniable. And so it was one of those things where clearly early on, that you had, some challenges there. I'll bring up Star Fox, right? As one of the real kind of early, progenitors of 3D, and it doesn't even really lean into the fact that it's 3D. I mean, it does, clearly in its looks and everything, but it's solid gameplay, right? So really at the end of the day, that's what really drives it. So from a business standpoint, and it's always been this way, right? We always, back then, even in the namings, like 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, there's always going to be the expectation that's going to be bigger and better and faster, more colors, whatever the case may be. And clearly at that point in time, right, it's like the reason why Sega was able to do what it did and surpass Nintendo at that point in time is because they were perceived as the cooler new kid on the block, right? Then now we get a couple of years past that, and now here's Sony coming in, with their bright new machine, and it's 32. It's 3D, and it looks shinier and nicer. I'll always stand on this hill. One of the things I always kind of like compared, the comparisons at that point in time was one of the big release titles for the PlayStation was Toshinden, right? If you remember that fighting game. And I hated that game because I
Really?
loved Virtua Fighter. And so, and then I didn't like the fact that, you kind of pirouette and all these other
Yeah,
things.
you can roll around and
You
everything.
can
Yeah.
roam around. And maybe it was a little bit too early for that, but ultimately that's where we ended up going, right? But I think it was just the implementation at that point in time. And plus I was a big, Sega head at the time, so I'm clearly going to be biased.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so yeah, that's, I guess, to kind of just go back around, I think ultimately, even though from a qualitative standpoint and, even maybe a design standpoint, 3D wasn't necessarily what it needed to be, it did usher in that. And then obviously now, here we are, right? And it is, now you start to see, an amalgamation of everything, right? So it's 3D, it still looks hand-drawn, still fluid animation and things along those lines. Clearly now the time that, we are now at that time, right, where, those types of limitations, aren't necessarily anything that we have to, be restricted by or have to, affect our designs, or our mechanics.
And the Jeff's suggestion, if he had the chance to go in time machine mode and fix Sega, is very valid. But I kind of tend to side with Eric on this one in the chats. His suggestion, I think, makes a lot of sense. So, yeah.
Make porn games, definitely make porn games.
I would agree with that one, too. That would have pulled
the question is there going to be peripherals or no? Because that's going to be, very important.
Peripherals for porn
games. You can sell those aside. And I guess
I can think of one. I don't want to say.
I'll leave that to you guys.
And I guess that is the show, Joe. Wrap it up for us then, okay?
All right, that's it, guys. That's 2 hours of the show talking to Sir Jeff. We are very privileged and very thankful for joining us today. Well, let's just do our shameless plugs before we pull the plug on the show. Yeah. Sir Dan, where can they find you?
As always, the Sega Mega Master Show still in hiatus at the minute. Unfortunately, my fault because my health treatments. We will be back at some point. Come check us out then, or in the Sega Genesis group. So, have a good one.
All right, thank you for that, Sir Dan. And Sir Joel, where they can find you?
Oh, you can generally find me streaming on twitch.tv and on kick.com. I'm planning on going through a run of either the Eye of the Beholder series from DOS era or maybe the Lands of Lore series. We'll see. But also I do some modern games as well. I'm thinking about going through Forza Horizon 4. I just got it for a song off of Steam. You guys might see me doing a little bit of racing too, but you'll always find me playing some fishing games on the side. So likely Sega Bass Fishing every now and then as well. All right, that's it for me. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you for that, Sir Joel, and of course the man of the hour, Sir Jeff. Where can they find you, and anything else that you want to promote?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really on social that much outside of Facebook. I mean, I do have some presence on Twitter or X or whatever the heck we're calling it now, but I'm not really on that all that much. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. Otherwise, no real projects outside of I'm lead game designer on Cookie Jam for Jam City. So we're on the mobile devices. So come and check us out. Been on the game for a long time. So one game that I'm super proud of, and actually a game that I didn't think I would ever do, it's a match 3 game, and it's a game that my mother actually plays. So if you would have told me, way back when, that I would be designing a game that my mom would play, I would have told you that you're lying. You're flat out lying. So, just to kind of see hey, where my career started and how it expanded and grew from there. So yeah, check us out on Cookie Jam. We're on all devices, Android, iOS, as well as Facebook. So yeah, thank you for having me here. I've loved being on here and meeting all of you and talking with everybody and all the great questions.
Thank you for that, Sir Jeff. And to be honest, guys, there are other questions that we could have asked, but we are pressed for time, unfortunately. Maybe a part 2 in the near future.
I'd be down for that.
Yay!
We'll hold you to that.
Okay, yeah.
No, but what would be like? Like we'll have Sir Eric and Sir Jeff both at the
Oh
same
boy,
time.
I don't know if we have enough space or enough.
Yeah, I mean, just a banter between the two of you might be a good might be a
your
good
site
first.
might explode.
Good
I'm
episode
just
12,
saying.
yeah.
But,
Your
but I
site
say
might
by
explode.
the end of that show, I'm pretty sure that they would have developed a porn game between them.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If we would have sent
Let
like
them
the
take
first
over the
to you
show,
guys
right?
for testing, because we need testers, right? You know, to
Yeah.
keeping with
We call it Eternal Wankians.
Oh my god. And
I'm
that's
not
the
saying
genesis of the show
Sorry.
of the genesis of the game right in this show. Make note of it,
boy.
ladies and gentlemen.
All right.
Take us home,
So
John.
Thank you so much, everyone.
on behalf of Sir JDM, Miss I, Sir Viraj, and Sir Ray and Sir Jomar, our bodies and our games and our bodies may grow out of date, but our gaming experiences will forever remain. Hey,
Timeless. All
Timeless.
right, guys. See you again soon. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.